Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Exodus. We are now in chapter 4. Now, remember, chapter 4 as a heading does not exist in its original form. And so I need us to be aware that it continues from verse 22 in the previous chapter. It says here, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, namely of her who dwells near her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. And that's the last statement that God made to Moses. Now remember, in chapter 3, as God was speaking to Moses, it was in the form of the angel of the Lord, who was completely empowered to speak to Moses in that sense. When we get to chapter 4, you will find that it is a continuation. The continuation begins this way. And then, as you know, that would be a continuation after that. What's going to happen is Moses answered. Moses answered and said to God. Now, as far as it's being discussed, it is very much the angel of the Lord that he has seen, and the angel of the Lord is speaking to him. But suppose remember, they would be the elders of Israel, but they will not believe me. Now, this word believe me is to have confidence in me. They don't trust me or listen to my voice, meaning to listen to what he has to say. Now, supposed to say, they say, the Lord has not appeared to you. Now, it's important for us to also realize that it is not so much as they do not believe in God. It's just that they don't trust Moses. They don't think. What happens if they don't think that God has appeared to Moses? And so, in the form of the angel of the Lord, then the Lord, verse 2, and then the Lord said to him, what is in your hand? And Moses said, a rod. Now, think of this as a staff, a shepherd's staff. Now, it is very important because the shepherd's staff is big, it's tall, it's long. It can be used for defense as well as attack. But it's used by Moses at this time because he was actually leading the flock and he appeared at Mount Horeb. And so, in that same conversation as in chapter 3, then the Lord said, cast it on the ground. And so Moses casted it on the ground and it became a snake. Now, this word serpent is really a snake. And in all natural reaction, in verse 3, and then after it turned into a snake, it really shocked Moses and he ran away. Now, why would he run away? Natural instinct. Nobody likes snakes. And when you see a snake, you run away. And so, thereby, we can see the enmity between the descendants of the snake and the descendants of the woman. And a natural instinct for Moses is to run away from the snake. I mean, nobody wants to hang on to a snake. And then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. And so he reached out. Now, this word and is and then. Right? All these are the connecting sequence, right? And then, and then, and then. This is step by step. And then catch it and then it became a rod or a staff back in his hand. This looks like an incredible transformation. A large staff thrown onto the ground becomes a snake, and it must be really scary. Otherwise, Moses would not run away that quickly. And then when he reaches out by his hand, obviously very afraid, it suddenly became a staff back in his hand. The purpose of this, that they may believe that the Lord God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. So the staff and the miracle is to lead to the elders to trust Moses. That's the first of the signs. Remember, all of these are very visible. There is nothing to imagine. It is what is exactly written and seen. Verse 6. And then, and then the Lord said to him, in that continuation of the discussion, very important for us to realize that this is a continuation. God showed him a second miracle. Now put your hand in your bosom. Now, what does that mean? It is to tell us that Moses is wearing something which is long and it's well covered. And so if he has to put his hand into his bosom, it means that it would be to put it into the inside of his cloak, inside of his garment, which means that you can't see the hand. And so it says here in verse 6, and then he put his hand in his bosom, exactly what God said. And then when he took it out, behold, look, his hand became leprous like snow. A few things we can take away from here is that it is like a little magic. You put your hand into your bosom, and then it became filled with leprosy, white. The flesh is dead. And that is something which you cannot fake. It is very real, right? It is very real. And then God continues to say this. And then he said, put your hand in your bosom again. Now, and then he put his hand into his bosom again, and then drew it out of his bosom, and then look, it was restored like his flesh. It became normal again. And then it will be, if they do not believe you, nor heed the message of the first sign. Now, notice the word sign is ot, it is visible, something they can see. It's not about imagination, that they may believe, they may trust the message of the second sign, the sign that came after. This idea of believe, it is to believe the sound, the voice, the sound. Now, what does that mean? The second sign was a sign of leprosy. And so this is, by all intents and purposes, the sign is to say something. And so by illustration, the second sign is to convey something very distinct about God. Verse 9. And it shall be, if they do not believe even these two signs, or listen to your voice, then you shall take the water from the river and pour it onto the dry land. The water which you take from the river will become blood on the dry land. Now, this third one was not seen. because there was no water at Mount Horeb. But the first two was done so that Moses himself can actually see. And so, right up to verse 9, it's about signs. Signs are visible. And signs are supposed to tell the people that God is with Moses. Now we see in verse 10. Verse 10 reads this way. And then Moses said to Jehovah, he says, "Oh my Lord." Verse 10 actually says, Adonai. He says, "I am not eloquent." Now we need to understand that there is no such word as eloquent. And so what this word actually means is that I am not I am not a man of words. That is what this word eloquent is supposed to be. And it says, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, which means that Moses is indicating that he has some form of a speech defect. Speech defect. Says, I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. The Hebrew is saying that I am heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Now, what does this mean? It's not just slow of speech or slow of tongue. It seems that Moses has a speech impairment. Maybe a stammer or a stutter, which means that if he is to represent God, it can actually create a wrong impression that God can't seem to find somebody who can speak properly. And so that would be his concern. It is not so much that he doesn't want to go, it is because he realizes that it is not a good reflection of God had he be the one to speak like that. And so in verse 11, and then Jehovah said to him, "Who has made man's mouth?" This is important. Who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Is it not I, Jehovah? This is to tell Moses that everything can be fixed. Everything has a purpose. But it is to be clear that nothing can actually obstruct God's plan. Verse 12 says, "Now therefore go, and I will be," this word here is "with your mouth." Now, this word literally means together with your mouth. And it says, "And I will teach you what to say." One of the things that we find here is that the stammer was not healed or restored. So God is still using Moses, but it is not so much as fixing his speech. In verse 13, verse 13 actually says, "But he said, Oh my Lord," he says, "Oh Adonai, please send by the hand of whomever you may send." And so this word else does not appear, is inserted by the translator. Send whom you will send. Basically, it says that. Send, delegate, empower. By the hand, and by the hand it will be by God's hands of whomever you will send. This is what it means. Not you may send, but maybe you will send. It is God's choice. Right? It is very important to say that it is God's choice. What is important now is for us to understand that this aspect of Moses saying that it is not to shirk from his calling, but he understands that he is not suitable to stammer and represent God. And as God did not fix his stammer, God still was sending Moses. And so he said, yeah, it's still your choice, right? It's still your choice. Verse 14. And then the anger of the Lord, or the nose of God, was hot against Moses. And then, so we have a series of and thens, right? And then he said, God said through the angel of the Lord, is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know he can speak well. And look, he is also coming out to meet you. And so on the other side, God had actually spoken to Aaron to come. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. He'll be very happy to reconcile. Verse 15. And you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth. And I will teach you what you shall do, not what you shall say. Notice, God says, I will teach. The word teacher is yara. I will point you to what you shall do or perform. Notice, even though it says you shall speak to Aaron and put the words in Aaron's mouth, God says, I will be with your mouth so that you can speak to Aaron and God will be with his mouth. And I will teach you what to do, which means that Moses is to perform. Aaron, on the other hand, is to speak. And so now we have gotten something clear. God never fixed Moses' stammer, and God provided a spokesperson, a mouth, literally, in the Oriental sense, for Moses. Verse 16 says this, and he shall be your spokesman to the people. Literally speaking, and he shall speak for you. He shall speak for you to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you. This is what God has said. I'm not fixing your mouth. I am giving you a new mouth. And in this, we can now see the arrangement. And you shall be to him as Elohim. This is what God has said. So, what exactly can we conclude from this? Moses is saying, I have a stammer, I cannot represent you. And so you find that God has told Moses that he will be with his mouth, and Moses will tell Aaron what to say. And so, what did God finally represent in this hierarchy? God is a God to Moses, it is his Elohim. God is going to make Moses the Elohim of Aaron. And so Aaron becomes mouth of Moses. Moses is the mouth of God. So now we have a two-tier setup, because at the end of the day, we must realize that Moses is speaking to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is also seen as the Elohim to the Egyptians. So this hierarchy is very important. The importance would be seen this way. Pharaoh and Moses will be at par, meaning Moses is an Elohim, Pharaoh is an Elohim. Both are kings and leaders and absolute authority. And the mouthpiece is Aaron. That would be as Moses to God, Aaron will be to Moses. And so Moses will tell Aaron what to say, and Aaron will say exactly that, like a prophet. So that you can now see the whole setup is that Aaron functions like the prophet of God, like Moses to God. This is the whole concept of verse 16, that Aaron will be the mouth of Moses, and Moses will be Elohim, right here, to Aaron. This is little appreciated because in any negotiation, Moses needs a standing before Pharaoh. Otherwise, Pharaoh will be talking to somebody who is of a lower rank, a lower class, lower authority, lower respect, and Pharaoh will not tolerate that kind of an engagement. And so it is important for us to realize Moses represents God to Pharaoh, and Moses will do the miracles while Aaron becomes the mouth of Moses, like a prophet, to speak on behalf of Moses. Like Moses would speak on behalf of God to instruct the children of Israel. But when he goes to present himself to the Pharaoh, his stammering is not going to make the cut. And so together, Moses and Aaron will be sent to the Pharaoh. In verse 17 says this, and you shall take this rod or this staff, right? This would be the staff in your hand, and with the staff you shall do the signs. Now, again, this word signs is visible. They are not abstract, they are very concrete. When it happens, everyone can see. Verse 18. Verse 18 would be after that conversation with the angel of the Lord in chapters 3 through 4, verse 17. And the angel of the Lord is a particular angel that walks on behalf of God and represents God in the speech. So, and then after that conversation, Moses went And then, now this word went is walked. Remember, he's at Horeth. And so now he's going to go back to Midian. So he returned to Jethro, his father in law, and then said to him, he says, please let me go. And this word go literally means let me walk. The second part is, and return to my brethren who are in Egypt and see whether they are still alive. So we have two parts here. And return to my brethren in Egypt. Return means to repent, to turn back. Which tells us that the origin of Moses is actually in Egypt because he was born there. Now he goes back to Jethro, his father-in-law in Midian, and he tells him, I will go back to Egypt and see whether my brethren is alive. And then, after hearing from Moses, Jethro says to Moses, he says, go in peace. I think the better word here would be go with peace. Go for peace. Go to peace. And by peace, it is shalom. Our next verse will be in verse 19. And then the Lord said to Moses in Midian, now they are in Midian, go, return to Egypt, return back to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead. This is after 40 years. Verse 20. And then Moses took his wife and his sons and then set them on the donkey. And then he returned to the land of Egypt. And then Moses took the rod of God in his hand. And so what we can see would be this. When Moses was in Horeb, there was only Gershon. And it is likely that the wife Zipporah was pregnant with a second child. And by the time he came back to Midian to see the father-in-law, she gave birth. Now, why is this important? It's because of the next passage, which is further down in verse 24. So just bear in mind that it is a time when Zipporah is likely to have just given birth. And now God says, return to Egypt because everyone who wants to kill him is gone. But bring the staff of God. What is the staff of God? The staff that was always in his hand. Verse 21, and then the Lord said to Moses, he says, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do all those wonders or the miracles before Pharaoh, which I have put in your hand. And I will harden his heart. Now, this literally means make strong, harden, right? Make strong. When the heart is strong, it means that he becomes more stubborn, so that he will not let the people go. So even after the wonders you do before Pharaoh, God is going to harden his heart. Now, how does God harden his heart? God hardens his heart by showing Pharaoh that Moses can do wonders and Pharaoh can't. And in so doing, make Pharaoh more upset. And by Pharaoh being more upset, he will be more stubborn. And when Pharaoh becomes more stubborn, he will not let the Hebrew people go. Verse 22. Then, and you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord. What are you telling Pharaoh? Israel is my son, my firstborn. This is the understanding that in the mind of God, Israel is seen as a son. Now, he's not a human son, but a son in relationship to God, someone who follows God and says he's my firstborn. Even more important, that this is the first of all sons. He is my firstborn. And in the Hebrew culture, firstborn is very important. Firstborn will inherit. Firstborn represents a lineage. And so in verse 23, so I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. But if you refuse to let him go, indeed I will kill your son, your firstborn. This in itself is a threat, which is telling us that in the early number of miracles, the Pharaoh will not let the people go because his heart is so hardened that he can't see God in the picture. He just see a lot of sound, a lot of smoke, but he is not seeing God. Now, God is doing it through Moses in all the miracles that he will perform. And every miracle will make his heart more stubborn. Verse 24. And then it came to pass on the way. Now, this is, and then on the way to Egypt. So, what is likely to happen is Zipporah has the second son, Eliezer, and he was not circumcised. And so, in verse 24, it reads this way: at the encampment, at the sleeping place, that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Again, whenever we read this, this is the angel of the Lord. Still, it is not God himself, but it is represented by the angel of the Lord and wanted to take the life of Moses. Of Moses. Without referring to all the traditions, just know that for some reason, verse 25, and then Zipporah took a sharp stone and then cut off the foreskin of the son and then cast it. This would say would cast at his feet. That's the word here, his feet. And so Moses' feet is correct. And then said, surely you are a husband of blood to me, or a son-in-law, or a bridegroom of blood. And why was this the case? It is all because of the circumcision. And so when the son was born, it was a rush for Moses. And so the thinking is that Moses forgot. Either that or Moses overlooked. Either that or Moses thought he would have time. But the eighth day came and the circumcision was not done. And so God enforced it. And with the circumcision of her son, the newborn son, God let him go. And then she said, you are a husband of blood, a bridegroom of blood, because of the circumcision that her husband was almost killed because of her son. That would be the way to say it. And she said about the son, "You are a bridegroom or husband of blood to me," meaning you almost died because you forgot to circumcise Eliezer, the second son. Now, with this done, now why was circumcision important? It was instructed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now it comes to a point in time that this honor of the circumcision must be done, because circumcision is a sign of the covenant with Abraham to understand that God will come and save them and lead them into the promised land. That everything is to depend on God and not about themselves. Verse 27, it says, "And then the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness and meet with Moses." And so Aaron went and met him on the mountain of God and then kissed him. So we can see now that we have Midian, we have Horeb, and then we have Egypt. So we find that Aaron came from Egypt and met him at Horeb. Moses would have left Midian and came to Horeb. Verse 28. And then Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him. First person to speak to was Aaron, and all the signs which he had commanded him to do. So the signs would be the wonders, the words would be the instruction. Let my people go to serve God in the wilderness. And then God says, but I will strengthen the heart of Pharaoh, and he will be stubborn and he won't let you go. Verse 29. And then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. And then in verse 30, it says, and then Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. So remember our structure. God speaks to Moses. Moses will tell Aaron, and Aaron will speak on behalf of Moses. So Moses is Elohim to Aaron, and God is Elohim to Moses. And so now we have this tiered structure so that at the end of the day, it would be Aaron speaking all the time. Everything that God said to Moses, Moses told Aaron. And then when Aaron speaks, it will be, thus says the Lord. And then Moses did the signs in the sight of the people. Who are these people? These people would be all the elders of the children of Israel. This is the people, not every one of the Israelites. It says, verse 31, and then the people trusted. And then when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and then that he had looked on their affliction, when they realized all these things had happened, it is important now for us to look at what is the result. And then they bowed their heads and worship. Now, again, I need to explain to you that there is no such word called worship. So they looked upon their oppression, affliction, and they, the people, and they, the elders of the children of Israel. This word bowed their heads. I think we need to look at this, bow their head. Uh, the word actually means to kneel down. They knelt down. Not so much just to bow down, but to kneel down. And this is the way. So to kneel down. And then the final word here is to do this. Yishtachahu, havu. Yishtachavu is to prostrate. Is to prostrate, which means that he will be on the ground, right? On the ground. So please bear in mind the idea of paying homage to God in the ancient days is to bow down, kneel down, face down, body down, prostrated, to pay homage to someone who is greater. And in this case, it'll be God, because they now realize, oh wow, God is hearing them, and God has since decided to come in to save them through Moses. And so the people trusted what Moses said, because he did the wonders, the signs, they are visible. When he threw it down and the snake was there, and he picked it by the tail, the snake was gone, put his hand into the bosom and then took it out, the hand became leprous, and put it back into the bosom, take it out again, and it was whole. Basically, to identify with the people that all these things, they know that if it happens, it must be from God, because it's not natural. It's not natural, it's supernatural. And by that, they all knelt down right here and prostrated themselves before God. Now, this whole episode is basically to tell us that Moses has nothing to worry about. God did not fix his stammer, God gave him a new mouth, and that would be through Aaron. God gave Moses the staff that he can do wonders like God. Basically, what we have is Moses is an Elohim to Aaron. Moses will be an Elohim to Pharaoh. Moses is the Elohim. And that doesn't mean God in that sense, but he represents God. He does the things a powerful person and a powerful deity like God can do. And so, for all intents and purposes, since man cannot see God, God designated Moses to be God to Aaron, to tell him what to say. But Moses is also God to the people, in the sense that they can see Moses and they are afraid of him, and they recognize that God has shown himself to Moses. It is not something to trivialize, it is something to be very clear that this arrangement is by God. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.